Hello, Lamar. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Could you introduce yourself to the Informs members?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Lamar Pierce, and I'm a professor of organization and strategy at Washington University in St. Louis.
Okay.
Also the associate dean there for executive education. And I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C.
Great. And how long have you been an Informs member?
Ooh, I had to look this one up.
Did you?
2009.
Okay. So pretty long.
I think that's pretty long, yeah.
Did you join as a student or?
No, I was an assistant professor when I joined. So.
How did you learn about Informs?
I learned about Informs. I'm sure it had to do with the journal, and I mean a lot of my work is sort of at the intersection of organizations and like people-centric operations, and so Informs is a natural place for me to be.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you. So tell us how you got into this field. When I was doing my little research on you, I see that you double majored in music and economics. So how did you end up here?
Yeah, I actually have 2 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting journey. I mean, I was studying music and I was studying economics, and my brother was a composer professionally, so I had a very good idea that I was not good enough to be a musician. And I was planning on going into economics, and what happened was I got waitlisted at one of the top econ programs, and I turned everything else down, and then I didn't get in. And so what happened was I went and got a job, and I started working in operations at Boeing in what was the largest factory building in the world at the time.
Wow.
And so that got me really interested in people, because I think, what I saw there was that no matter how well you did the production planning or, figured out, we were implementing just-in-time production at the time, it really all came down to trying to get people to do things that they were supposed to do.
Right.
And that's what got me really excited about it. And so I decided to go back to grad school at a business school.
Cool.
And thus sort of ended up in this career.
Yeah. So the econ program, that would have been for a PhD, the one you were waitlisted for?
Yeah, that's right. It would have been for a PhD.
Okay.
And so I went to Berkeley. I went to Haas Berkeley for a PhD in business and public policy.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Boeing. So it looks like you kind of started your career out in industry and then have made the switch to academia.
Yeah.
But you still have your foot in both pools. So what prompted you to make that switch? And what have you learned about each career path that would be helpful advice for young professionals?
I think I always wanted to be an academic. I always wanted to do research. I mean, I grew up around it. I grew up in a college town in eastern Washington, and so my father was an academic, and this is sort of the classic story, right? And so I sort of knew what that entailed, and I'd sort of grown up around that. And so when I was working even then, I was just sort of trying to decide sort of when to go back.
Okay.
And so
you kind of always knew you were going to go back.
I kind of always knew I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that at least in that job particularly, that I observed was that it felt like it was going to be a very long time before I could make a substantial impact in a company that at the time I think was not making a lot of changes at once. And so this struck me as a way to sort of make an impact earlier, at least the way that I was going to do it.
Through research?
Yeah, through research, and then also through working with companies. And so that's something I've done since, as soon as I left grad school, I worked with 3, tech platform companies. And that's always been fun because, I teach this stuff.
Right.
And so I
teach
sort of strategy more broadly.
Yeah.
And so, one of the nice things about working in these startups, if you're one of the first people, is you get to do everything, and you get to design the strategy from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you're also doing operations, and you're doing HR, and you're doing marketing.
Yeah.
And so I've always just, I've loved to be at that intersection.
Yeah.
It's been really exciting and fun.
It does sound fun. So do you have advice for young professionals or recent graduates trying to pick a side, I guess, or which career path to go down?
Yeah, I guess for people who are in graduate school, I think the most important thing to remember is that there are lots of different ways to have great careers, and there are lots of ways to be happy. And I think there used to be, and probably in some places there still is, this stigma in PhD programs about going to industry.
Right.
And, there's nothing fundamentally less valuable about going to industry. There are great careers there. And I think, particularly for people like me who have training in economics, I think there's particularly an increased appreciation for those folks on job markets. And so, there's just lots of different ways to be successful and do what fits best with the life you want to live.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some of the companies that you've worked with in your research. You have a role as a senior non-resident fellow, which you mentioned, in governance studies at the Brookings Institute in D.C. Can you describe that?
Yeah, sure.
What do you do
So part of what I do out there is I run the executive education program at Brookings.
Okay.
And so what that program is, it's basically, you can imagine, is sort of a broad menu of executive ed classes for government executives and some industry people as well. but it's basically the idea of taking sort of general leadership and management, in some operations classes, and translating them into high-level government leaders. So many of our students there, manage like $200 million budgets within the federal government. And so there's a huge potential to make impact there because you can bring in some of these basic ideas about like creativity or, basic leadership, or I'm teaching an exec ed class on sort of human capital next month, or I also teach ethics. And so what happens is you bring those folks together from all sorts of different agencies and from the military, and it gives them an opportunity to really discuss all the issues that they've had. And one thing that's so valuable about that is that when we're managing in firms, like for-profit firms or nonprofit firms, we have a tremendous amount of latitude in what we do. And what we have latitude in is we can change policy. So we're like, oh, this doesn't seem to be working. Let's talk about the compensation plan. Like, what's so funny about it in the federal government, the students always laugh about this, is that there's very little they can change, right? You can't change the hiring plan. You can't change the comp plan. You can't change, the structure, the way the budget works. And so much about the success there is about soft skills and leadership. And so there's a real potential to make an impact there. And, one of the great things about doing that, too, is that, I think people have this false idea about, people who work in government. And I mean, these are people who have dedicated their lives to their country. And they're working incredibly hard in jobs where they get paid probably a third of what they could in industry. And they're just incredibly dedicated to doing that. So that's what I do. And as part of that, I also bring out a number of our programs, our graduate programs, out to Washington, D.C. So we'll take all our MBAs, all of our executive MBAs out. And we basically, because we're at Brookings, we have the opportunity to have them meet with some of the top experts in the world, former White House chiefs of staff, members of Congress, and where they can actually, ask all these questions about, like, tell me about the process through which you regulate, say, coal production. And so it's a really fun, it's a fun role. One of the misperceptions about lobbying is that lobbying is like this, behind closed doors, like, pure influence issue. And, like if you talk to people in government or to sort of the reputable lobbyists, they're doing two things. One, they're trying to influence policy, obviously. They take a position. But what they're also doing is they're informing, and they're doing exactly this. And in fact, if you talk to the people who are top lobbyists, or the people who are sort of top regulators in D.C., these folks are really valuable for them. And they're valuable because, like, if you're a member of Congress and you have, say, so suppose that you're a representative and you have a staff of like 5 people, and they're all in their 20s, being underpaid. They're incredibly good, but they're like there because they believe in it, not because they're there for the money. They aren't experts in everything. And suppose that you've got a 2,000-page tax bill coming down, or you've got a new page on investing in semiconductors, for example. None of them are experts on this. And so what they'll do is they will call in people, it sounds like Jeff, who will come in and they'll say, hey, here's this bill. Tell me what I need to know about it. And what they understand is they understand that, they'll bring in multiple people. They know what their positions are. So it's not like they're being like bamboozled about this. And what happens is they gather that information so they better understand what the bill is. And what the good lobbyists understand very well, or the good advocates, is that you cannot blow your credibility. So if a congressional office asks you to come in, then you better be straight with them and you better be clear with them, because otherwise they'll never invite you back in. And the same thing applies with the White House. So if you're talking about like OIRA, which is the key sort of regulatory coordinator, they're constantly asking for public opinion and from experts. And so they really want somebody who's an expert on operations or analytics or electrical engineering to come in and tell them, hey, here's the regulation you're proposing, here's why it's going to be a disaster. Because they simply can't be experts on everything. So I think that's really important.
And that's what we're trying to position influence members to do. So I'm going to get you in touch with Jeff. I think you guys would have a lot to talk about.
That'd be great.
So you mentioned your research, and you often speak about strategy and policy for ethics and human performance. So just give us a little synopsis of what someone might learn from one of your public talks.
So there's a whole world of people who study business ethics. And there's a whole world of people who study like productivity, whether it be in personnel operations or whether it be in org econ or organizational behavior, a whole range of things. And oftentimes they aren't really talking to one another, and they're oftentimes thinking of these as separate dimensions. And so one of the things that I think has been unique about my work over the years has been, I think about these things as part of a holistic policy, which is that in some sense, ethics is, and misconduct is sort of the opposite side of productivity. And so what happens is managers and policymakers oftentimes don't think about both of them together when they're designing a policy. And so what they'll say is they're like, we need to improve labor productivity by 15%. And so they jack up the incentives, or they put in high-powered incentive schemes, and they don't think, okay, this is also likely to affect a whole number of other things, one of which is misconduct and ethics. And so a lot of what I do and a lot of what I talk about is the idea that you have to think about these things in parallel.
Yeah.
So when you're designing anything around productivity, you have to understand, is this going to, reduce misconduct? Is it going to increase misconduct, and where and what can you do to mitigate that? In the same sense, and this is the bigger mistake I tend to see firms make, is they tend to say, we need to really tramp down on misconduct or fraud or whatever it is, whatever type it is. And so we are going to start surveilling all of our employees very carefully, and they don't ever think about, like, how does that spill over to motivation? How does it spill over to retention?
Yeah.
I mean, I had a meeting with a top 10 retailer one time with their head of sort of theft prevention, and they just have huge amounts of retail theft. But they were concerned about their employee theft. And I was talking with them, and they said, yeah, we fire about 5,000 employees a year for stealing from our stores. And I said, really? I said, and why do you think that is? Well, they're like, we get these bad employees. And I said, well, what happens? I said, what happens after you fire these people? Because what they do is they sort of catch them and then they fire them. They're like, well, we let the managers, hire new people. And I looked at them and I said, do you realize what is the most common determinant of employee theft? And they're like, no, what is it? I'm like, it's because their boss is a jerk. Oh. And this is the way that they can sort of get some sort of, self-worth back, some sort of revenge. Reciprocity is a very strong thing in humans. And I'm like, and you're letting these bosses hire the same thing. You need to think carefully about what's generating the misconduct, not pointing fingers at it.
Yeah.
And the reality of that is, if they were to dive deeply into their data, and we have all these tools to do this now, what they start realizing is that, for the most part, the variance is not explained by the employees, it's explained by the managers.
Interesting.
Yeah, so.
I worked at Bed Bath & Beyond in college.
Oh, you did?
They were very strict about obviously, don't steal from the store, but even don't take a pen home. And of course, there are people who do that just because they're told not to. They take that pen home. Or,
No, it's when I was at Boeing, we had somebody actually got fired. It was very hard to get fired at Boeing, just because of all the rules with the union and everything. And so, but we had one person who got fired because he was caught trying to smuggle out an anvil between his legs. He had basically attached chains around his waist and was hanging the anvil down between his legs and was kind of waddling out.
Did he think that he was going to succeed?
I don't know. People succeeded in a lot of stuff like that there. So who knows?
What did he need it for? I need to know more about that story.
That's a good question.
Yeah. So you've also published dozens of academic papers in a handful of scholarly journals. Can you tell us any current research you're working on?
I've actually been doing a number of projects around auto retailing in the auto industry. So one working paper that we have right now is we run a randomized control trial with 294 car dealerships with a budget of $61 million. And what we did is we used dealer incentives, these dealer incentive programs, which are sort of these very nonlinear incentive programs for selling cars. And the only thing we did was we basically randomized whether or not they got their payment up front. So if they got their bonus payment at the beginning versus whether they got it at the end. Because if they got it at the beginning and they don't make it, you yank it back from them. And this is something that we call loss framing. So it comes straight out of prospect theory in psychology and behavioral economics. And the idea is that people are going to be really motivated to retain that.
Yeah.
As anybody who's worked in operations knows, when you do that, there are a bunch of knock-on effects. And it ends up actually being costly. So, I've been working on that. I've been trying to understand whether or not this lay theory of clutch performers exists. So looking at car salespeople, I think we've got really strong evidence that, this idea that comes from sports, that you have some people who are just clutch performers, is not a true theory. It's a lay theory that doesn't exist.
Okay.
And then, I have another one where we look at the spillovers of that. Look at the spillovers of these incentive systems on subprime car loans and defaults, and basically find that the manufacturer incentives to the dealerships actually spill over into the lending to subprime borrowers and lead to higher mortgages because the car dealerships are motivated to put them into cars that they otherwise probably couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And the buyers not being aware of, all these implications,
Right.
They don't get things like gap insurance, and so they end up defaulting on these loans. But I think more and more I'm moving toward this idea of the intersection between firm policy, firm performance, and I think even more importantly, social outcomes. Like, what is the impact of this on society when firms do the right versus the wrong thing?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah.
So, speaking of scholarly journals, you are the incoming editor-in-chief for Organization Science, so
Yes,
congrats
I am.
on that. Tell us what you're hoping to accomplish when you take the reins in 2023.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, I think there are a couple things. I think the first part is operational. So, first thing is, again, trying to make sure that we're getting papers back to authors quickly, and we're getting them decisions and clear guidance early on.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm constantly aware of, and one of the reasons that I decided to take this on, is that I've known so many people who, deserve to get tenure at their school, and barely missed out on getting it because some paper was rejected in the 4th round, or things got lost in the process, or they didn't get, a diligent editor or fair. And I'm not speaking specifically about org science. I'm talking about lots of journals.
Yeah.
And I kind of came to this realization that, if somebody can come in and do an exceptional job as an editor-in-chief, they might keep like 30 people, or more or less, who knows, but a number of people they might keep from having to uproot their family, having to move, and change their lives because of one paper that didn't get a good review process. And so that's really, really important to me, is to get those operations right. Then I think the other thing too is I want to really focus on making sure that organizations research, and specifically in this case, coming from org science, is in the middle of policy debates. And I mean policies at firms, but also sort of in public policy. So I want to see more research that has big social impact, that takes on a lot of the major challenges, because oftentimes I think the field is not well enough represented in those policy debates and discussions, whereas it has a lot to say. And so, focus on things that have big social impact, like public health. I mean, certainly in operations, there's this entire world of healthcare operations that I can say as a patient many times has had a tremendous impact on healthcare. I mean, you can see it if you go into hospitals now, and you were in hospitals a long time ago, you can see exactly what all that work has accomplished in terms of, reducing mortality and morbidity. And so, I think papers and research that could come out in org science can have a big impact both in that setting, in understanding development in, emerging economies, in a whole number of different settings where there's a big social impact to be made.
So you're in it for the social change.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's, I don't really think about it so much as social change, but just like, how can we help people's lives?
Yeah.
How can we help organizations be better? I just think there's a lot of good that we can do as a journal, and I don't think that is in any way inconsistent with advancing science. In fact, I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah. I think you should do a study during your tenure of all of the people you've saved from not from getting tenure at their. I think that would be
now I'm going to start getting some narcissistic personality disorder. No, but I mean, the other thing I'll just say about this journal, right, is that I think I'm also viewing this really as, as a team effort. So, I'm bringing a bunch of people who have different expertise than me and different ideas than me, but a similar mission. Yeah. And so, I never think about what we're going to do with the journal as being about like, here's what I'm going to do. It's like, we're going to do some great things, and we're going to do this as a team. Yeah, I'm just really excited about it.
That's great. Good luck. So speaking of, journals again are an informs member benefit, right? Yeah. What member benefit do you find most useful as a member of many years now? There
are so many different ways I think it's beneficial. I think, for me, it's always been integrating with the community in multiple sort of fields. And again, I'm a little bit of a strange character in that I'm somewhere at the intersection of strategy and organizational behavior and marketing and operations. And so for me, Informs is just a perfect place for that. Because, if I look at all the journals. So like, I've published in MSOM, I've published in Management Science a lot, Org Science, Strategy Science I haven't yet. But they're just, there's so many different places, so many journals there from different communities who I think are all studying at the intersection very similar things.
Yeah.
And so like, for what I do, this idea in operations of people-centric operations, which MSOM published a special issue on. Management Science does that, Org Science.
Yeah.
I mean, I just see so much overlap there, and Informs is the organization where that happens.
Yeah. Are you a member of those sections and societies, the specific, like, strategy science section and org
I don't
science?
remember which
Communities,
others.
if you will.
Yeah, I'm not sure which other community I'm in. I'm obviously in the Org Science community, but I forget a lot at this point in my life.
You probably joined a bunch, but they're great, and the community business meetings that happen at the annual meeting are great as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What's your favorite thing about that place?
Okay, I'm from a small college town on the border of Washington and Idaho. It's a place called Pullman, Washington. Washington State University is there.
Okay.
So this great place to grow up because there was this combination of, you had a world-class university there, and it is in the absolute middle of nowhere. I mean, it's hard to imagine a major university that is more in the middle of nowhere. Seriously, like, but what was great about it was, you had access to all these, great resources on campus, and so it was possible to learn a lot. You saw like, major music acts coming.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, when I was growing up there, we had all the Seattle bands were coming over.
Yeah.
I'm that old, and so there was that. But in the same sense, it was this wide open space, and like my backyard was wheat fields, all these rolling hills at the base of the Rockies.
Yeah.
And so you could just get in a car and you could drive on dirt roads for just tens, dozens of miles for as long as you wanted to go. And so it was possible
and not see anything, or
yes, I mean, and particularly in high school, like it was just it was possible to get out and just get away from everything.
Yeah.
And I think the older I get, the more I appreciate that now.
Interesting. Was there like a lot of hiking or anything?
Yeah, there's a ton of hiking. So
Yeah.
my family still has a bunch of property up in North Idaho.
Okay.
And so we go up there all the time. It's off the grid. And
Yeah.
So so there's lots of hiking. I mean, there's lots of everything there.
Yeah.
Because you're 4 hours from Seattle as well. And so
Okay.
you can go to the west
Whereabouts
coast.
in Idaho? Just curious.
We're way up. Our property's way up north, near the Canadian border.
Oh,
so
okay.
north of Sandpoint. So it's
Yes, my sister-in-law lives in Sandpoint.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we're
why I was asking.
about 10 miles north of Sandpoint.
Okay, I haven't been out there, but
Up a place called the Pack River.
The Pack River.
So off the grid. Once you get up there, it's a unique area.
Yeah.
But you could walk from our property to the Canadian border. It's probably
Wow.
about 40 miles without crossing a road.
Okay, cool.
It would involve a lot of steep ascents
Yeah.
and descents, but it's great. Yeah, no, it's great up there. We have everything from grizzly bears to wolves to wolverines to we have some chipmunks too. They're
Yeah.
pretty exciting.
My sister-in-law sent me a video of a bear in her front yard. She was like, well, not going to work today.
All right.
Didn't leave the house. So if you could secede one state from the United States, which one would it be and why?
Oh wow, that's quite a question. I guess I got to spin that on its head. I wouldn't think about seceding a state because we know how well that goes historically. Yeah, I would think about adding a state. I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous at this point that we don't have Puerto Rico as a state. I mean, it's got a ton of population. They vote. If you look at the historical adding of states to the United States, I mean, why don't we have it added? And, I have some theories on that, but that seems like that would be really important because those people are part of our country and they should be have representation.
Have you been to Puerto Rico?
I've not been to Puerto Rico.
I have.
Have you? How was it?
It was really nice.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great. We went for a wedding. It
yeah?
was a destination wedding. We actually stayed longer than the bride and groom did. We extended our vacation, saw all the places, went to Arecibo Science something. I don't know. My husband was into it. Anyway, it was really nice.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah, I've heard it's lovely.
Yes. So do you have any hidden talents, any interesting hobbies you want to tell us about?
Hidden talents. I don't know. It depends. Is talent a positive thing or is it a negative?
Well, whatever you got.
I mean, I play piano a lot, so I mean,
Okay.
that's one thing that I do.
Great.
So I spend a lot of time doing that. I'm trying to think of I'm very good at Nerf basketball.
Nerf basketball.
Yeah.
So
Right.
just basketball with a soft ball?
Yeah, and you have the little hoop there.
Okay.
My son and I play a lot.
Got
It's
it.
pretty
Okay.
exciting, so,
Yes,
yeah.
I get it now. Well, great. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing about yourself.
Oh
and
yeah,
your-
thanks for interviewing me. I really
Yeah.
appreciate this.